Yes, there's a time and a place for everything. But if you can't show your emotions at work and you blur that line between work and home life, and you can't express your emotions to your family and to your friends or to your kids, then that is going to be a problem that's going to make you more susceptible to burnout and ruin those relationships. Welcome to Give Yourself Some Leeway with me, your host, Eugene Lee. Today, I'm joined by Steve Anderson, a coach who helps men to become better dads. And we talk about getting to know your feelings on a deeper level and how to express them, the neuroscience behind this, and delving deeper into your family values. If you enjoyed today's conversation, let's have a conversation about it. We can discuss it on a deeper level at giveyourselfsomeleeway.com. You can reach out to me at eugene@leeway.ie or send me a message, send me a DM, voice note on Instagram at eugene.leeway. Thank you. And I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Steve Anderson. Steve, welcome to Give Yourself Some Leeway. And thank you again for joining so early in the morning. I think these early morning podcasts, this is when our brain is most clear, most crisp. So thank you again for joining so early in the morning.
Oh, I'm very happy to be here, Eugene, and I'm with you. I do my best work in the morning, and hopefully that'll show up in this podcast.
So tell me a bit more about yourself, Steve, and who it is that you serve and why you do what you do.
Um, okay, well, it's sort of interesting as far as who I serve. It took me a while. I just figured it out as I was doing this, and this kind of goes way back to when I was a teenager. When I was a teenager, my dad ran a drug rehab center, and this was in the 80s. It was very stressful, and he wasn't able to handle it really well. And eventually, he actually had a nervous breakdown. And so when I was a teenager, my dad has a nervous breakdown and actually put in a hospital for 30 days. So he didn't kill himself. I mean, this was absolutely career ending, serious, life threatening thing. And I'm going, I'm just a kid. And the one lesson that I took from this is like, okay, working in an office is death. Don't do it. It's working in an office, terrible. Um, and we didn't talk about it too. So there was, I think, in the 80s, uh, really mental health issues, and there's still issues now, but I think we can talk a lot more about them. When people are stressed out or dealing with things. And in the 80s, it wasn't. I don't didn't tell a single soul. So some people must have known, but it was never talked about. I just knew office is bad. So I thought I'd take a nice, easy route, and I joined the army. I mean, because being in the military sounded like, well, that would be nice, in a sense of purpose. So I did the army for about 3 years, got out, and I went to college. And, you know, I knew in my head, okay, I don't want to work in an office. I got a degree in English, and then I got a master's degree in English. And for a short time, I actually ended up in an office, but I told myself, hey, this will be temporary. And I was working for a government transportation agency, doing some writing for them. And so I did that. First year was great, had a really good boss, learned a lot about it. Boss left. It was sort of chaotic. I was just kind of paid to not do much. And I'm like, well, I don't want to do this. And so I quit, and I ended up teaching, right? And so teaching at I think in Europe, university level, but a community college in the United States, teaching, I would work 9 months a year, right? I wasn't in a cube, and I could, each semester was different. And I really liked working with students. So, that was a way for me to, I felt good about work. I'm not in my office in an office, because in the back of my head, office is bad. And the funny thing is my dad actually, after his nervous breakdown, went back to school and ended up being a teacher. So, at one point, both my dad and I are English teachers, and I really liked it. And I would show up, enjoy teaching, but I had some stuff emotionally that I just hadn't dealt with, because growing up and those kind of things, my mom was bipolar, and so there would be manic ups and downs, and it was just a lot going on that I never processed because we didn't talk about it. And so do well at work, my outside life, as far as dating, for example, you would not, I like apologize to every woman I dated in my 20s and 30s. Yeah, because I just emotionally wasn't there and able to connect. And so I started doing my work around emotional stuff in my 30s. And when I started doing that, I started working with other men, which was really, it was like, oh man, I'm with these other men and we can talk about our emotions and what's going on. And that was eye-opening and life-changing, right? So that personal side of my life started changing, right? I was learning to, I could open up and I could have deeper relationships with people. And then when I was working with men, I also got a chance to work with teenagers. And I became, so I'm teaching full-time, but on my own, outside of work hours, at times I'm working with men, and you can think about like a weekly circle where we get together and talk about what's going on. And then I started working with an organization called Boys to Men. It's not the band, if you know that, if you're old enough, but actually, I think it's international. I know there's a lot of it in the United States that mentors teenage boys. And I became the director in Minnesota, the state where I live in, and I would lead weekends. And these would be transformational weekends where, we'd have a staff of about 28 men and, 10 to 15 boys, and help them learn about who's the man that they want to become. And so these were all things I was doing outside of work that were incredibly fulfilling. And work was safe and I enjoyed it. But I write in the morning, and I noticed in my journal, I opened up an old one. For about 10 years, I've been writing 1 or 2 years more of teaching, and then I need to be out of this. Right. So, my dad had his burnout, and I think that inoculated me from getting burned out. But the flip side of that, right, is I wasn't pushing myself either, because I could teach. I'm a good teacher. My students like me, I like my students, but there was something more that I wanted to do. And it took me about 10 years to say, okay, I'm 50, I hit 50. I've got these skills, working with men and teenagers, and I want to use that more, right? And so just within just last year is I said, okay, I'm going to do it, and I quit teaching. And so now what I do is I work with men to help them become better fathers. And it was so funny, as I'm putting the program together, I realized, hey, knucklehead, right? I created a program that I wish my dad would have had in the 80s. So that is where I got. And one of the things too that I think is really important is when I say like I work with men to help them be, better fathers, it's the better father they want to be. Right. Because there's no cookie cutter. We're all different men. We all have our own experiences, and we all think, hey, but I think we all know, right, that best self that we want to be, or at least we have an inkling in it. And so, that's what I do is I help them figure out, okay, who's the father you want to be? What are the roadblocks that are getting in the way of you being that father? And it's everything from work-life balance, messages we've got, from our own, how we were growing up, what our parents did. And some of us are like, I'm going to do the exact opposite, right? Some of us are going to do the same. And sometimes it's like, man, I gotta do something, different, or our kids aren't us. And I think that's another big thing, because I have 2 boys. I ended up getting married and adopting my wife's 2 boys, and I met them when they were 4 and 9. And luckily, I'd done so much work with Boys to Men. I knew coming in as this, the stepdad, hey, you got to hold back. You got to be there and be present, but it's a different thing, and give them space. And then eventually, I was able to adopt both of them, right? Which is awesome. And they are so different. It's like we can't parent the same to the oldest and the youngest, because, one's outgoing and artistic, and the other one is, reserved and likes math, you know what I mean? And they're both wonderful and they both need different things from us. So I think that's a sort of a nutshell of what got me to where I am, and the men that I want to serve and why.
That's beautiful, especially where you made the program that you wish your father had, that you wish was there for your father. And a very important part is what you mentioned back in the 80s. And even as recently as I'd say 10, 15 years ago, you couldn't have that conversation around mental health. It was, oh, you don't talk about that. Or you know someone that's going through
Right.
something and you're like, it's like, oh yes, but we don't talk about it. Like we know it's there, but that's a conversation that shouldn't be had. That's very private. We don't talk about that in public. We
Right.
don't have that conversation. So that's it is very important that there's a lot more awareness nowadays and people are more open to having that conversation. But a lot of the time, even when people are more open to having that conversation, they feel that they can't speak up, especially men.
Oh, absolutely right. Because I think the way I see it is we've been given, like, okay, you're a man or you're a teenager, you've got two emotional options: anger or apathy. Right? Like if you're a teenager and your girlfriend breaks up with you, you can be mad at her and call her names, or you can say, "Oh, I don't care." Right? Anger or apathy. And I think that kind of sticks with us, right? If you want to go and all of a sudden say, "Hey, show any signs of vulnerability," right? That's scary as heck. And there are definitely places where being vulnerable is a bad idea. So to be able to walk that line of, I need to be vulnerable so I can have real connection and figure out what's going on, but finding places where, right, I'll be listened to, I'll be accepted, or people aren't going to, make those harsh judgments. Oh, you're not handling this, then there's something wrong with you, as opposed to, oh, you're a human being on this planet. Of course, there's things that, are stressful or, difficult.
Yeah. And I feel that a lot of the time, yeah, it's exactly that. We're told to be the tough guy. You need to push down those emotions. Don't show vulnerability because that's a weakness. Don't say that you're stressed out at your job because
Yeah.
you'll be seen as incompetent at your work. You won't get that promotion. You've got to make yourself look like the tough guy, the leader at all times. If you show any sign of weakness, you're going to be put down. And people live with that mentality of the tough guy act and the stoicism. And that's what you have to bring across. And you can't show any signs of weakness or it's going to spell your failure. And then they have that constant fear of failure that as well, the uncertainty, the insecurity that they can't express those feelings. Whereas as soon as you open up and start being more vulnerable about those feelings, then no one can use them against you. Because
Yeah.
if you're that honest with yourself, that open with yourself and say, this is what I'm feeling right now, and this is how I deal with that emotion, you are in control of how you feel and how you deal with that emotion. And once you have your emotions in check, that you're not, as I say, pushing that beach ball under the water and it's going to it's just that it's just ready to like just emerge and just like burst out of the water and it's going to come out in like in one big blast rather than having it that uncontrolled that it can go in any direction. That if you can just channel and control your emotions and communicate them with your friends, your family, with other people who may be experiencing them in your network, with your colleagues, and just have that open line of communication, it just makes things a lot more easier. Then and I feel that's exactly where we are. And again, with your boys to men group as well, that's you're creating a space for that conversation.
Right. And I think, one of the things that when you talk about owning your emotions too, I think if if I share something with another person and they're like uncomfortable about it, if I'm really owning my emotions or I'm prepared for it, I can be like, okay, I shared my part. This person doesn't know how to deal with it. So they're making jokes or they're changing subjects. Okay, that's not on me. Right? We can make that separation. And for me, as I was a people pleaser, right? There's still that aspect of me that absolutely is, and to be able to not please other people, right? Is for me, that was some work, right? But I think the way you talk about that ownership, right? Here's my feelings. I'm not going to hold it down anymore, right? But I can express it in a healthy way, right? And then how the world deals with it, how that person across the table, that's something that I can also handle, right? If that person isn't ready for, to hear about my sadness or my pain or my frustration, okay, now I know this is a person who's not, who isn't capable or isn't a spot. And then I can, right, maybe go someplace else, right, and find it. Because there are places, right, where at work, so both my parents have passed away, but one did it during the school year, right? Like he planned it or something. When my dad died, the school, the college is like, okay, your dad died, you can have 3 days off. That's the standard, funeral leave or whatever is you get 3 days. And grieving is more than a 3-day process, right? And the world doesn't stop turning. And how many people, at my work, oh, sorry, condolences, here's some flowers, and that was very nice. And then a week later, everybody else is at their normal life. And if I say hi in the hallway and they go, how are you doing? I not a great place to say, well, you know what? It's only been a month since my dad died and I still think about him a lot. Or, every time I see this, that's not a hallway conversation, isn't that right place, even though maybe at some point it's going to burst out and that would actually be okay. But it is interesting, right? And when we learn to first express our emotions, I think we all need to be kind to ourselves and realize that we're probably going to do it poorly, right? If you've never expressed your anger, you are going to probably be a shouter for a while, right? And go, oh my goodness, I didn't know I had that in me, right? Or if you're never expressed your sorrow, when you first open up, right, it's going to be shocking and it's going to be hard to do, but that's how we need to take those risks, right? And have that courage to be authentic, right? And to share that emotion and just trust in ourselves and be kind to ourselves that, okay, when we first do something, we're not great at it, right? And this is something that we can practice and learn and get better at it. And for me, as somebody, working with fathers, I think it's so important, right, that we can role model this. My dad could not role model how to handle stress, because, at least not in a healthy way, because he didn't know how. He didn't, much later he could talk about his feelings, and we had, as adults, decent conversations. But as a teenager, he wasn't able to have a conversation about how to deal with stress, how to deal with grief and frustration, because he didn't have the skills himself, right? And I think one of the things as parents, right, is we don't, and we can be messy about it, right? It's not about being perfect or great, but we can be able to say, hey, Sandra, man, I am angry right now, and or I'm sad, and model, you know what, I'm angry right now, so I'm gonna go take a walk around the block because that helps me cool off. Or, you know what I mean? Or I'm sad right now and you don't have to fix me. It's okay. As I'm sad because I've missed my dad, and and just saying it makes me feel better. Right. And so don't worry, you're my son, you're my daughter. I love you. I know you love me. You don't have to fix me. I'm just going to be sad for a little bit, and that's normal. And sometimes you're going to be sad, and I don't have to jump in there and try to make you happy, because feelings come and we're meant to experience them, right? Not to some point where we're doing, really bad things, but of course, right, it's not just anger and apathy for our boys, right? And I think women and girls are more, have better vocabulary around emotions, right? But that doesn't mean they have better skills around them too. All of that needs to be taught.
Yeah, a lot of things that you reflected on there, especially about, let's say, how you control your emotions. It's not until you start expressing them. You probably have been bottling them up your whole life. Next thing you find, you start expressing them, you're like, oh, I don't like the way I express them. Well, if you've never actually learned how to control them or balance your emotions once you start channeling them, it's kind of like the first time you ride a bike or the first time, let's say you're riding a horse, you can't tell which way it's going to go if you've never ridden a horse before in your life. You can't control it. Or if you're riding a bike for the first time, you've taken the trainer wheels off, and of course you're probably going to fall a few times because you don't know how to handle it at speed or handle going over a bump. So you're like, okay, I have to get used to channeling my emotions. How do I channel them? How do I regulate them? And it's going to be uncomfortable at first, of course, opening up for the first time. Sometimes you put yourself in having those conversations with people that you're not open to having those, let's say, sharing those emotions with. It could be your partner, it could be your family, it could be your friends. And they're not used to you sharing the emotions either. And that you might feel like it's that you're making them uncomfortable. But again, that could be their own deflection that maybe they're not comfortable sharing their feelings with you either. And you, let's say, offering that chance, that opportunity to open up is maybe what they need too. And yes, there is going to be resistance at first, but having that space where you feel welcome to open up, and that can be a network, it can be a community, it can be, as you said, having that boys to men's group where you can just have that platform for discussion to be yourself, to be more authentic to yourself. Maybe that's what we need to see more of in the world.
Well, absolutely. And that is why I was such a terrible boyfriend in my 20s and 30s, because I couldn't open up and share how I was feeling, right? I was too afraid that if I said, that people pleasing, that they weren't going to love me, and it was like, so when I think back of that, it's like, oh my goodness, because I've been with my wife, Katie, for 10 years. And, early on, um, you know, I took the chance, and open up and would tell her what I was really feeling, right? When I was scared about something or worried about something. And it was, oh my goodness. I mean, um, we've been together for 10 years, and it is the best 10 years of my life. Because I have a partner that I'm connected to, and of course you get the two wonderful boys, and this is just like a full deal. Right. And it's not, we've had challenges, of course, right? But we can be in that spot. And it's such a relief that I didn't know. And, I'm just kind of putting pieces together now too. My folks, I never saw them really communicate on emotions and how their feelings. There was uh, there were no open disagreements. It was more like there wasn't. And so for me, when and this will still happen, I will say something maybe about like a future plan that I have, and after I do that, right, like here's something that I really want to do, I feel super vulnerable, right? And for about 2 hours after I do that, I will just feel I'll feel vulnerable. I'll feel uncomfortable. And in the past, I would try to fix it. And now with my wife, I'll go, man, I feel vulnerable. I feel a little, shaky, and she'll just listen. And all of a sudden, it's like that deep breath, and I go through the discomfort of being vulnerable a lot faster. Right. And then every time I do that, because I have such a supportive partner, she's proven, that we've both proven to each other, right, that we're trustworthy and that we can handle each other's emotions, which is something that, can take time. It's like, oh my goodness, now I get it. Now I get why people get married. Right? But I didn't get why people got married in my 20s, because my folks, they loved each other, but it wasn't this team, where it just, they got there, but they got there in their like 50s and 60s, and they ended up being a husband wife ministers. I mean, it was great, but it took them a heck of a lot of time. So yeah, that vulnerability is so key. But I also want to point out too that there's a reason, right, that men are trained not to show their vulnerability, right? And I think part of that not so, part of that is because, right, who do we want to go into the minds? Right. And if you think, just go back 100 years ago or 70, you're right. It's men who are supposed to go into the mind, right? Before the sun comes up, go down, risk their lives and come back, right? If it's a war, not that terrible things happen to everybody, but it's the men that are expected to go and fight. And if you want, you don't want the guy going into the mine complaining about how cold it is or how dangerous it is, right? Or the black lung that they were going to get. It's like, no, shut up. We need the coal. Right. I was in the Army, right? And it's like, you don't want somebody to go, okay, well, we got to go march for 10 miles. 10 miles. Come on. That seems silly. We've got vehicles. So some of that stoicism, right, that you talked about, or some of that toughness is because, we expect men to do things that we know, well, that's not, who wants to go a mile underground, right? And most people don't, right? So we got to create a system where, that we just, we shut up and do it. Why? Because we care about our families, and that's going to pay the bills, and we can feed them, right? I mean, so vulnerability is so important. And I also think that toughness that is often required needs to be respected too. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but in the right context. I think that
Yes.
the issue is that people feel that they need to have that stoicism, that toughness in all aspects of their life. And they blur the boundary between work and personal life. Yes, you can show all that stoicism and toughness in your work, but when it comes to showing up for your family, you need to have that vulnerability and those open lines of communication. Yes, show that you have the discipline, but also show that you can be aware of your own surroundings, aware of the people in your surroundings, connect with them on a deeper level, and show up, taking care of yourself so that you can show up at your best for those you love, and not just for people pleasing, but just so that you are aware of how important these connections are in your life, and that you can show up and understand everyone on a deeper level, have those connections, be able to open up with your friends, family, colleagues on that deeper level as well. Show that you aren't just this hollow vessel that is made to march those 10 miles or go down and get the coal. It's like, no, you need to show that you are also human and have this collective human experience.
Right. There's a reason the Spartans disappeared, right? Because nobody wants to live that lifestyle for, you know what I mean? Raising your children to be absolute warriors and things. So absolutely agree with you. And I think purpose is where this comes in, right? What is the purpose of the toughness? If the purpose is to get you through a hard day, great, because you can use that to get, but if all of a sudden you're getting home acting the exact same way that you act at work to get through a tough day, it's like, well, wait a second, is that your, what's your, what kind of relationship do you want with your friends, with your spouse, your partner, your children? And it should be different, right? And I like that, the purpose-driven idea, right? If you're going to embrace stoicism and vulnerability, both of those, right, at different times, why are you doing it, and to what cause, right? And I think, right, and how much I'm laughing because I'm thinking about how terrible a dad I would be if I was like, my son's going through something, pick one, go, well, this is a time to practice, showing them stoicism, as you know what I mean. And he's like, when we were, I felt so bad about this. We were they have slides. There's it's a concrete tube, and you slide down it on a sled. And we made it all the way down, and he was in my lap, I was in back, and somehow, and he's about 8 at the time, we flipped the sled over. And I don't know how we did it. It was right at the last end. And he scraped his forehead on the concrete, right? And I thought, okay, I'm the worst human being on the planet. I don't know how it happened, right? That was not the time for me to be stoic and teaching him stoicism, right? It's like, come on now, don't, it's like, that was terrifying for him. He flipped over, he's there, and it's like, that's the time for, comfort and empathy, right? Not the teaching toughness lesson, so yeah, it is. I like what you said about it. When you use it, why are you using it? Who are you using it with? Right. Because every virtue can be a vice if you take it too far. Right. And every vice of virtue if you know how to use it. Right. They say don't lie. Right. But if somebody comes in here and says, hey, and they've got a gun and they say, where's Steve? Please lie. Right. Because that's probably the bigger thing to do, is to keep people safe. So yeah, I like what you said about that, and just the importance, right, of keeping our relationships up there as a priority, right? And of course, we'll make sacrifices. I can't spend 24 hours with any one person, or that won't happen. But yeah, and that burnout, right, that you talk about, that burnout is a burnout of relationships, right? It's definitely a burnout of other relationships at work. But how does that not transfer over? Like my dad, he would come home, he's burned out, and what would he do? He would go to his office and be gone all evening. So that work burnout was also burning out any solid relationship with family. Man, that should be like a note that says, like, remember your relationships, right? That could be good to have at the outside of every house, right? So, or apartment, right? When you walk in, it's like, okay, yeah, who am I coming home to? And remember that.
Yeah. But even at times, especially when you're burnt out, you don't see those signs. And most times, it's only in hindsight that you go, that's what I was missing out, and that's why I was feeling that way. When people burn out, it's not that they're just drained. They're like, for me, I was so mentally and emotionally numb that when people were asking me, how are you feeling? Why are you not showing your feelings? I was like, well, it wasn't even depression. I was, I couldn't even tell. I was like, I don't know what I'm feeling right now. And yes, that it affected not only my work, it affected my friends, my family, how I was showing up for everything. And I was still blurred the line between work and personal life because I was still trying to power through. And yes, bringing work home, taking on extra projects outside of work, so that I was like, no, I need to be productive in some way. I was restless. I didn't, at the same time that I didn't have the energy, I was still trying to achieve more. I was like, I don't have the energy for this, but I need to make it look like I'm still being productive.
Do you know what was driving you for that?
What
What
was
was
driving me to for more? It goes back a long time. It actually goes back to the earliest thing that I can think of, and it's from my background. It's I come from a farming background, and there's always this thing where there's always a job to be done on the farm.
mm,
So anytime that you might have a day off and you're like, I'm just going to sit down and read a book for a few hours. And if you're caught just sitting in your bed reading a book, it's like, hey, there's work to be done. You can't just sit around. There's always work to be done on the farm. We'll find a job for you.
yeah.
And that was just drilled into me from a young age. So I always knew that even when I moved away from the farm and had my own place, and anytime I just sit down in my living room, and next thing I'm like, no, I could be doing something more. I know I'm done work for the day. I've done my 12, 13 hours of work.
Yeah.
I could be doing something more. And that was something that for years I was like, no, I had work. So I was like, no, I can go to gym. I can go to gym. I can make myself better. I'll have more energy if I start working out more. So I used to work out in the evenings. Next thing I found out, no, I could be doing more stuff in the evenings. Gym is so busy in the evenings. So I started going to the gym before work in the mornings. So just start going at like 3 a.m. and then working from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then in the evenings, I'm like, oh, I can help out in the community. And next thing, it 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 wasn't long before, well, it was actually about 5 years of a downward spiral, but it just got to a point where I didn't have the same sense of achievement no matter what I did, no matter how much or how little I did in a day. I wasn't recovering because I still had that in the back of my head being like, you're not enough, you're not achieving enough, you're not striving for enough. Um, it was just this constant loop, a vicious loop in the back, a thought loop, being like, you need to do more. And I was so physically, mentally, and emotionally drained. I couldn't do more. I couldn't even process how I was feeling or how I should be able to turn up. And because I wasn't being productive and showing up with the energy, I couldn't influence other people the way that I wanted to because
Right.
I wasn't showing up with the right mindset. So it wasn't until I took a step back and dealt with that. I was like, no, I need to become more aware of myself, have my own emotions in check and communicate them better, set my own boundaries. And then I was like, if I start showing up for myself first, start taking care of myself, start get rid of that vicious thought loop and start showing compassion to myself and then start taking care of my health, then I can show up for others.
So what if so right, you got the work ethic without the lesson on how important breaks are, right? To recharge. So what do you do? So what is your I build models, right? Plastic models. Give me some World War II vehicles or some sci-fi stuff. I'm happy. I don't do it as much as I would like, but that's my break. Have you figured out something that you like to just do what Eugene, like just cool. Eugene chilled out, gets to do this. What is that?
I'll give
Are
you
you still
one
looking?
good guess.
Reading or podcast? Is this your
It's the podcast. Funny enough,
okay?
it's the podcast. The podcast fuels me in a way that, yes, it's something that even when it comes to the editing of it, I'm like, this is something that I know, and it still fuels me with that passion that I'm getting these stories out there. That not only my own individual experience, I'm learning more about myself the more that I share other people's stories. Because yes, I can resonate with other people's patterns. That yes, they're feeling something similar to me. It's not always just me. When I start documenting my own story, I got a lot of feedback of people being like, "Oh, but that's you. You're the kind of guy who gets up at 3 a.m. to work out. That's probably not what I'm feeling right now. So whatever you do, whatever your approach is, it's not going to work for me." And I was like, "I'm hardly alone here. There must be someone else who's feeling like this."
Yeah.
And then once I started reaching out and just getting other people's stories, and then having this space for discussion, creating a platform for people to open up about those stories and share them with the world, that I was like, okay, this is something that I enjoy doing. It's something that, of course, I have to set boundaries that I'm like, no, look, I have my priorities. I have to put everything else first and then make space for the podcast and as my downtime. And when it comes to editing and stuff, yes, of course, have a healthy boundary. But that is just something that I like to wind down. And at the same time, it fuels me. It's something that it's probably not as relaxing as putting together World War II models or sitting down and reading a book, but I think it's something that if I sit down for too long, I do get restless. So and I used to love reading as a kid, but now I just got to this point where I'm like, no, something has I have to keep on moving, and this is something where I'm like, okay, I'm engaged. I can be present in the moment. I'm talking to other people about their experiences, and that fuels me as well. I'm like, okay, I'm psyched. I'm helping someone, or they're helping me with their experience, or it's a two-way street. So that's something that it's purpose, passion driven, and I think that's something that people it's what drives people to burning out in a sense is when they're doing repetitive work and they're stressed, they have a massive workload, but they don't have intent or purpose in what they're
Yeah.
doing.
And it's so one of the things like in the men's work and the teenager work is that we always teach people is that you watch body language, right? Because if there's all of a sudden the shoulders drop or you see that breath, like you can see, okay, something landed there, right? And you can go there. But so I just want to say it's like I have no doubt the podcasting is that place for you because as soon as you were talking about it, you got the smile on the face, right? In the energy. It's like so it is very cool and clearly this is something that recharges you and is a service to others. And I think one of the things that I would do when I was talking about new people coming in to be mentors, like they would come in, oh, I want to help boys, and I'd be like, okay, great, but what are you going to get out of it? Right? Because if you're only there doing something for somebody else and you don't get anything out of it, well, that's not a recipe for success or long-term anything, right? So it's like when we can do something that we care about in combining that with helping others, like what you're doing, right? You get out of this is your own, space to, explore yourself in this stressed out, and you get to connect with other people. And what you're offering, right, is that connection for so many other people, right? To get connected in that understanding, because what I really, there's so much about what you're doing I think is really important for, and not only men, right, but for women to understand that, because there are differences, right, and a lot of the expectations about how we deal with stress and everything, to be able to hear these different stories and to think, oh man, right, that person next to me, right, is kind of acting like that. I wonder if they're overwhelmed, right, or stressed out, or to say, oh my goodness, right, I felt that. I'm feeling that. I'm not alone. There's not anything wrong with me, right? It's just that I'm in a current situation where, right, my passion, my values, they're not all lined up and they're not working. So I'm in some way, I'm doing too much of something and not enough of the other thing. And that can be really hard. So one thing I do want to share, have you ever seen like a feelings wheel?
Yes, I have seen them before, but again, explain for everyone else what a feelings wheel is.
Okay, so this is a feeling for those of us, and I'm including myself, who are not, or at least, and I'm better now, not great at being able to identify our emotions. Our feelings wheel, and I've sent you one that I like. It's got a lot of details. Basically, there's an inner circle, and when we were working with men in the men's group, we talked about I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm afraid, and I always forget the third one, but just very simple, right? And you start with those simple feelings, and that's at the center of the wheel. And then what it does, and this is what's so important about, so we can help identify, it expands into more detail. So there's one emotion like anger, and then there's another ring where it goes into like 8 different emotions tied to anger, and then another wheel. So if I'm feeling angry and I can look at this wheel, right? Like I'm pissed off, I'm angry, and I can look at it and I can kind of scan out and say, am I angry or am I feeling ridiculed? Right. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm angry because somebody made me feel small, right? Or am I skeptical? Right. Or am I violated? So those are like 3 that come from the anger. And the power of this is, if I'm angry, okay, maybe I can take a couple breaths. That's all I know about it. And I'm sort of stuck, but that didn't work. I'm still pissed off. But if I'm ridiculed, now I can go, oh, wait a second. I feel like somebody put me down, and I can explore this. Did they? Am I overreacting, or am I reacting right? And then if I did, okay, I've been ridiculed. So how am I going to respond to that? Right. Or if I feel violated, am I angry because a boundary issue has come up, right? I'm being asked to work an extra 2 hours, and I said I was going to be home for this. That's why I'm angry. So this is a boundary issue, right? And it goes for each one. So fearful, and I'll just give you 3 for fearful. And then I think that's a nice sample. It could be, am I fearful because I've been excluded, right? Oh, now I'm left out, right? Or am I feeling inadequate or overwhelmed? So all of those 3 get tied to fear. So I'm afraid. Okay, what are you afraid of, right? What am I afraid of? And it's like, oh, well, I don't want to be left out. Okay, so I don't want to be left out. And I can, you get more specific. And I think that gives our brain a chance to start going, okay, first I can see, is this valid, right? Am I really going to be excluded from my best friend group? Is this one of those topics that they're non-negotiable about, or am I being silly? Or is it really fear of exclusion? And maybe, and here's the part that about dealing with emotions, and this is where the courage comes in, or maybe not even courage so much as faith, that if I go through and deal with these emotions, that at the other end of it, I'll be at a better place. What if I'm fearful of being excluded, right? That this group isn't going to, want me anymore, but I really shouldn't be in this group anymore, right? Like, this is not where my purpose is taking me. It might be a great group, but I want to work with this. I want to do this instead, right? So, I think one of the reasons dealing with emotions are so scary is because oftentimes it will require us to do something different, right? Because if I just get pissed off and I just be pissed off for a while and it goes away and I haven't dealt with the underlying thing about why I was angry, well, I'll just keep going through that cycle and being angry again and do whatever behavior I do and I'll be angry again. Whereas if I think about, right, this is a boundary issue, well, if I deal with that boundary issue, there's going to be consequences, right? And now, okay, I won't be feeling angry, but maybe I'll be looking for a new job, or maybe I'll get new respect at work because I said, you know what, this was our original agreement. I'm sticking to it, and I think a lot of times I think sometimes we undervalue ourselves and how people see us. And so sometimes when we set boundaries, we might be surprised that the other side is actually like, well, okay, we still want you there. And then if you are in a place that doesn't respect your boundaries, how long do you want to stay there? Even if it is bringing in money, right, to support your life, is there another job out there that, could support you and not, violate your boundaries? So yeah, it's talking about this is like, man, emotions are scary, right? No wonder, right?
Yeah, no wonder people are struggling to have those conversations. It's something that we're just not used to opening about these emotions, especially the feelings wheel. It's like it's similar to the five whys. It's something that we cover a lot in quality management. You always ask
Okay.
why, then why, then why, then why. It's kind of like having that toddler that always asks why. It's like, why is the sky blue? And it's like, oh, and it's like, but why? But why is it blue? And why is that? And why is that? And why is that? And it's like, why is the ocean blue? And they keep on just asking why and why and why. And no matter what reason you give, they're going to keep on asking why until you get to the root cause, until you can't ask why anymore. So again, the feelings wheel is like, why are you sad? And you go to the next
Yeah.
branch and it's like, what
Yep.
kind of sadness is this? And it's like, okay. And then it's like, and now what can we do about it? When you get to the final why, it's like, now what can we do? What can we do so that this doesn't happen again? Or what can we do so that when this does come up, we know how to address it properly? Not being like, okay, every time you're sad, regardless of how whatever that sadness is, take a deep breath or go for a run. That's not going to
Yeah.
that's not going to work for every time you're sad. Or if you're feeling angry, there you can't just say, "Oh, have a glass of water. That'll cheer you up." And it's like, no, that's not going to be the right approach for every time you're angry. You're going like, no, what is the root cause, and what can we do here? What's the best way of managing this? Because
Right.
sometimes it can be just a misunderstanding, as you said, and it's like, do I feel ridiculed? Is it because someone ridiculed me, or is that just because how I interpreted it? Is it something that I haven't addressed that makes me feel ridiculed
Mm-hmm.
or that makes me feel violated, where the intention wasn't actually there? It's just how I interpreted the situation. And I think that's, again, it's a great way of helping people to better understand how they interpret their own emotions, to become more aware of themselves, how to control their emotions, how to communicate their emotions with others. And I think that's something that once you start opening up like that, being honest with yourself, that is a massive superpower. That is a huge superpower that you can add to your arsenal in terms of how you can overcome stress, both in work, how you deal with your emotions with your family, and connect with people on a deeper level. Because it's very uncomfortable now. It can be very uncomfortable and painful to address those emotions if you've gone 30, 40 years of your life without ever addressing them.
Right.
Because maybe as a kid, if you ever expressed your emotions, you were told to be quiet. It's like, stop crying, or stop complaining. It's just they're like, no, that's not doing you any favors. Stop complaining. It's like, okay, now I feel like I can't express those emotions. But now having those conversations, yes, it is painful and uncomfortable at first, but it is so relieving and freeing once you're like, I can express these emotions, I can understand them better. And it makes me a better person to be able to communicate my boundaries, having respect for myself so that I can show up and be better for everyone else around me.
Yeah, and I think when you can do that, right, when you can express your emotions in a constructive way, I feel like we're both lighter because we're not carrying that, but we're also more grounded, right? Because I can be, man, I was really angry, but I can be like, okay, it's grounding to be able to identify where these feelings are, and because our feelings are temporary, right? It's like if we can address them and say, oh man, even as soon as I say I'm angry right now, right? Or I feel like this is, man, I feel ridiculed. It's like a step away from it. I still might be really upset, right? And I get to feel that, and I'm going to feel it, but it's not like a blind emotion where I'm just like, so I'm angry and I'm going to do something angry, right? I think it's so um it's important not only for us, but once we get good at it, and I found, right, then it really helps with empathy with other people, right? Because when I can see how my emotions are driving me, I'm more open to understand why, maybe that person was a jerk right now. Maybe they're a jerk and that's just their personality, or maybe they're overwhelmed, right? Or they're worried about getting, laid off or not making something. And it it never understanding my emotions or somebody else's emotions, right, isn't an excuse for bad behavior, right? It can be a reason for it, right? And so maybe when that person is being, a jerk, instead of coming back with equal jerk energy, I might say like, man, it seems like you're really upset right now. Is there what's going, in that what's going on? Maybe that works. Maybe that just makes them more mad. But seems like you're upset. Is there some way I could help you at work with this project? Or that's just a quick kind of made up thing, but um to be able to both be kind to ourselves as we're learning the skills about how to really handle our emotions, and same with other people, all the while keeping boundaries. I think that just makes, right, workplace is going to be better, home's going to be better, right? Because you can say, hey, I can see you're angry right now, and I know when you're angry you say all kinds of crazy stuff. So let's take a pause, right? And then we'll come back and figure out what's going on and deal with this, or, whatever kind of strategies you come up with. But you can't come up with a strategy to deal with an emotion if you haven't identified the emotion. Right.
Yes, and when you've identified the emotion there, like as you just said, you're reframing the situation to a way that it makes more sense, or that it's more well-rounded. It's not a biased, oh, this is how I'm feeling and that's how they must be feeling. It's like, no, you reframe it that
Right.
maybe this is how the other person is feeling. Maybe they don't realize that's how they are. Maybe that this is them deflecting their emotions because they don't know how to deal with them yet. And you have to try and maybe see from their perspective, and maybe that helps you understand them better. And then that gives you the chance, okay, maybe they're not an asshole. Maybe
Right.
maybe they're just resisting this situation because they don't want to show those emotions. Or maybe they are. And it's like, okay, maybe I just need to distance myself and set a boundary here so that we don't have this conflict as much anymore. And that's okay too.
Yes, and one of the things I didn't mention, I actually took a 14-week course on neuroscience for coaches, which was really good grief. I'm going to be unpacking it for a very long time. It was intense. It was a lot of really valuable things, and one of them comes right to this: we are actually terrible at guessing other people's emotions. So when you would look at, and the research even goes into, they would show these faces and you would say what the emotion is. And they were like, oh, see, look, this proves that we're good at showing emotions. But they did some more tests and found out it's like, no. So when we look at somebody, we might think that they're mad, but they're just thinking, or that's what they're, so there's all kinds of different, there's cultural expectations on how faces, like in certain cultures, you call it stoic, you might be feeling emotions, but the appropriate thing to do at this time is to not express it in your face. So somebody from an expressive culture is be, look at them, they're cold and they're heartless. And it's like, no, we are actually pretty bad at judging people's emotions. Now, if somebody's face is red, their fists are clenched and veins popping, yeah, the dude's angry. Back away. But, so much of that, right? We're sitting and talking with people and we'll think, and sometimes that can be even our own insecurities, right? Or us projecting our thoughts on them. If I was saying this, I would be mad or I would be sad. So they must be mad or sad too. So, being able to communicate and not assume somebody is, that we know what they're feeling without them actually giving us some sort of confirmation is important, because we are not typically on your day-to-day basis really good at judging what somebody's feeling just by looking at them, even though it feels like we can, right? But the research is like, no, we're not as good as we think we are at that.
Steve, if there was anyone, let's say, and they felt stressed, overwhelmed, or they can't regulate their emotions right now or figure out what they're feeling, is there any one question you might ask yourself to, let's say, to maybe ground yourself or become more aware of this situation? How am I feeling?
Well, I'd make it a two-step part. And this is from the neuroscience. We've got uh, uh, a sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight, right? This is the part of us that kept us safe from tigers and snakes. And it's shallow breathing, and it limits our thinking. Our prefrontal cortex just kind of gets shut off, because it's like you're going to freeze, you're going to run, you're going to punch, stab. And that's where we don't make good decisions. And so we want to get to the parasympathetic nervous system. And that's where that breathing, we tell our kids to breathe when they're freaking out. And if you take 6 breaths a minute, so it's like a 10-second cycle from breathing in to breathing out, that switches us from that fight or flight response. It actually is changing, how our brain is working. So the breathing part is important. If you can take, a minute of 10-second breaths, 10 seconds from the time to inhale to exhale, and get close. Don't worry about counting to 10. If you're doing that, you're going to get your brain to switch over from the I have to immediately run away or punch to, okay, now I can start thinking about this. And you had mentioned reframing. And that can be huge, because after you've caught your breath, right, and you can actually get that your thinking part going, you can say, okay, what's actually going on? Am I accurately evaluating this? Right, because sometimes we can jump straight ahead to this is a catastrophe, right? And whereas that, so the am I doing this accurately, judging what's going on accurately? And then the other piece that I would just add to the end of this is, if you have to do something, right? If you're feeling like, okay, I've judged this accurately, I think I need to do something, think small steps, right? Because if you're stressed out at work and say, okay, now I have to quit. It's like, well, holy cow, that's massive, right? Maybe it's like, okay, well, before I quit, maybe it would make sense that I had my resume up to date. Can I do my resume over the weekend and update that? Or, so breaking it down into smaller, manageable parts. There's way more to it, but I would, breathe. Is this an accurate assessment? And then what's a small thing? Because if you do that small thing, that's actually going to trigger your dopamines, right? Which is the thing that can lead to addiction and be why we get hooked on drugs, but it also can feed positive behavior. So if I do that small thing, I get that success of being completed. And now all of a sudden, instead of coming from this, fear or defeated place, it's like, oh, okay, I did that. And you can build on that momentum, right? So, if you've got that big daunting thing, breaking it down into that smaller part so you can actually get started, I think it's definitely a strategy worth trying.
Brilliant. Steve, if there's any men who want to become better fathers, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Well, I will give you a link to a website. And holy cow, how did I not have this in my head? It's a new website, but if you can just email me at steve@steveanderson.coach, and I will send you a link to the website. But yeah, I'd be happy to talk to. There's a little bit on the program that I offer, and they can set up a call with me, but there's no sales on the call, right? We can just talk for a half an hour about, what's going on in their lives, what they're looking for, and see if there's, at the very least, they get to have a half an hour conversation, right? Where talking to somebody who wants to help them be the best dad that they can be, right? And by that, I just mean in the moment, right? It's not about being a great dad every day. It's about being the best dad today with everything that's going on today. But yeah, I would be happy to talk with them for a half an hour, and we can see, and that will help get them. Typically, right, if you get to talk to somebody like that, they'll get some clarity on what it is that they want. And then if it makes sense that what they want and what I can offer will help, we'll keep talking. But a nice half hour, just kind of what are their concerns, what's going on. And yeah, I would love to do that for your guests, for your listeners.
Thanks, Steve. Again, I love so much what you're doing and helping all those dads out there and helping men to speak up about all those emotions that are often just they've never had this space for discussion before. So I really love what you do and keep on doing it.
Oh, thank you. It's been great talking with you, Eugene.